So we'll now hear from CASA, Civil Aviation Safety Authority.
Roll machine, Chair.
Indeed. It's the way we roll at RAT, isn't it?
Till tomorrow.
All right. I make it work. I don't know how long they've got for CASA. No,
I don't think a lot.
Now, I asked you if you got the chair the other day, last set of estimates, and you looked at me like I had two heads.
Well, I think at that point the process was still ongoing.
I was on the money.
You were, Senator Sterle.
Fancy that.
So, welcome to representatives from the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, but I would like to start by acknowledging the appointment of the new CEO and DAS, Ms Spence, and having had interactions with you before at estimates and other places, I look forward to you leading this organisation. So congratulations on the new role.
Thanks, Chair.
Do you have an opening statement?
No, thank you.
Congratulations.
Senator Sheldon.
Thank you. And I'll add my voice. Congratulations on your promotion.
So we're going to be nice to you for the first day, is that right?
That's right.
Until the machine,
I'll bask in it while it happens.
until the machine gobbles you up and turns you into something else.
That won't happen. I just want to go through the stakeholder matters which have been raised with me. There's been some. You might have seen before about, we've been asking questions, you may have seen earlier, but we've been asking questions about the relocation of air traffic controllers out of Sydney Airport to Melbourne. One of the concerns that's been raised prior to these estimates hearings is that the Melbourne-based controllers will not be cognisant of local noise issues like Sydney residents. Would you expect a public backlash when this leads to more aircraft noise over the Sydney Basin, or is that something that's been taken into account?
Senator, I might ask Mr Crawford what role CASA has in approving those sorts of changes.
Yeah, Graham Crawford, Group Executive Manager, Aviation. Look, essentially, when there's any changes proposed by Air Services, they're required ultimately to make an application to us. As you can appreciate, our primary focus is obviously safety rather than noise, and we're interested in knowing if they're making a change, how will they continue the current operations and transition to the proposed new operations and maintain the necessary level of safety. So we're not specifically focused on the noise aspect.
Can you step me through, so I'm sorry to ask you, you just briefly step it through rather than detail, just what's the steps that Air Services will go through to seek approval for the changes in operations for those that may be going to Melbourne or those that may be made redundant?
Sure. So essentially, they would put in an application, essentially saying they're changing their current operations solution to a proposed new solution. And when they do that, again, our primary focus is how do they maintain, as a minimum, the same level of safety. So we're obviously interested in, when they're making the transition to the new arrangement, what potential risks do they see and how do they intend to manage and mitigate those risks. And again, I emphasise, obviously, our focus is on the safety aspect to make sure that that is maintained during the time of change.
I think so. I just want to move to a slightly similar sort of issues, but One Sky, which is, of course is a $1 billion project, was signed off with Sydney having a standalone air traffic centre. How much were Thales charged to amend this contract and reconfigure the system that has already been designed? And will this cause further delays to the already heavily delayed implementation?
Senator, I think that might be better placed to Air Services Australia. We're not involved in the contract with Thales.
I'll move to...
Previous Senator Patrick did ask a number of similar questions, so you might find some of the answers to those are in Hansard.
Oh, thank you, Minister. That'll be helpful. I'll have a look at that before I send any questions over to Air Services. I just want to move to another matter. Has the Ayers Rock Aerodrome trial of Class E airspace commenced?
I would have to take that one in notice. Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head.
Sorry. Can I just come in here? You have one job to do, seriously. Something as simple as that, Mr Crawford, with the greatest respect. Can you get your finger working on your phone and just send a message to downtown or something, for crying out loud? It's not a hard thing to find out, come on.
Well, we've done a number of assessments of Ayers Rock in the past. Maybe a little.
Let's dig deep.
We have
Someone
somebody
here
trying to
will
get
know.
the answer, but as you know, Ayers Rock has been a location that's been a subject of much discussion, and we've done a number of trials over time. That's hence why I took it in notice, because it's
Yeah,
a
I understand.
continual piece
Mr.
of
Crawford.
discussion and work.
Sure, I understand, but you know, with the greatest of respect, Ms Spence is new in the seat. We find, and I'm going to say it right now, this is very important questions from Senator Sheldon, you know, and what we have found, we were still receiving questions on notice. I don't blame the agencies, I blame the block at the Minister's office, as late as yesterday. So please, someone out there in that other room, before you leave today, let's get the answers. And Chair, I'd say I don't even mind waiting 3 minutes. I think Senator Sheldon won't mind while we put a phone call in and do something, please.
We've got somebody trying to do it right now.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Senator Sheldon.
Thank you. Thank you. Deputy Chair, is it the case that obviously we don't know whether there's a Class C airspace has commenced, so we won't know details of the project. Is there anyone here that does, or? Because what I'm trying to look at is the trial involves, I understand, the introduction of Class C airspace down to 3,875 feet above ground level, which equates, of course, to 5,500 feet above the mean sea level.
Senator, I think the detail of the arrangements, and Mr Crawford can correct me if I'm wrong, would actually be a better place to Air Services rather than us. We approve a proposal that comes through to us, but the detail of the arrangements, I think probably Air Service would be in a better place to go into detail.
Can I just support Ms Spence? It is an Air Service proposal that was out for consultation. I haven't got the specifics in my head, but they did put a proposal out, got quite a bit of feedback, and they were going back out again. That's my recollection.
I can confirm that the Ayers Rock Class E assessment has started,
But
Thank you.
it's been extended because of COVID situation.
May I just ask this? Sorry if you don't mind, Senator Sheldon. And I understand you said it's Air Services to put the proposal, but you guys give the tick off, not Air Services. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct, Senator. So if you're going through the detail of it, that'd be a better place to work through the detail of
Sorry,
that.
Ms Spence. They've put a proposal up, but it's you guys, you're the agency that's charged. You'll have the final say, yay or nay. So have you had any conversation around that proposal, anything at all? Is it shooting pie in the sky? Has it been done somewhere else in Australia, or is this brand new, just a thought bubble?
So the process is they put in what we call an ACP, an air change proposal, for the airspace, or an airspace change proposal, and we will evaluate it. And again, it's a similar process to what we talked about earlier. We're interested in what the current situation, the proposed situation, and any potential changes in the risk profile and how that's going to be managed. Because Ayers Rock has been a subject of multiple reviews over the last number of years, it's an area where there is some interest by some people in the community, obviously, to do a change, or some people in the aviation community to do a change. So it's a kind of living example right now. So they have in the past put in submissions, they have proposed to do a proposal. As I say, we're working with them on it, but we haven't reached a conclusion yet.
But there's certainly been conversations between CASA and Air Services on proposals and how they would work, and so it's not just a cold presentation of a proposal.
No, I understand that. Sorry, Senator Sheldon. Apologise.
That's right. Is it true that CASA has approved a Class E at Mackay Airport at night down to 700 feet AGL?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I would need to take it in notice. We can get the information. It's just not at hand.
This is frustrating.
so we can get that before you leave today.
We're trying.
We'll try.
to, yeah.
We've got somebody in the back of the room
Yeah, no,
attempting to do that.
thank you, that's good.
So was Air Services, these are some questions on this. Was Air Services Australia the airspace change proponent for the application of the Mackay low-level Class E airspace? And I appreciate you now
Take that on notice.
finding whether the Class E is there and what's happened with the 700 feet AGL. Would it have been subject to a cost-benefit analysis?
So I guess the first thing is any change in the current airspace to a future proposal ultimately comes from Air Services to us. Sorry, I missed the second question. What was it?
Would there have been a cost-benefit analysis that CASA would have been
We wouldn't
involved in?
specifically look at the cost-benefit analysis. We look at cost-benefit analysis when we introduce a regulation that changes a set of circumstances and the impact that might have on industry.
Is it possible for us to get a copy of the cost-benefit analysis?
I think you would have to go to Air Services for that.
Yeah, as Mr Crawford was saying, we would be looking at it from a safety perspective because it's a proposal that someone else has put through to us. It's not our regulations where we would look at the costs associated with imposing those regulations.
Right, I might move to another subject. A member of the public, Mr Glenn Buckley, has raised with my office an issue related to his flying school, Melbourne flight training. And he said it was fine to mention his name. And Mr Buckley has advised that he was told by CASA that his business was an unauthorised operation, and he feels he did not receive a proper explanation as to why this occurred. You can take it on notice unless you have the answers here now. Are you able to clear things up about what that assertion is from concern from Mr Buckley?
I think, Senator, there's a long history to CASA's engagement with Mr Buckley, and I'm not sure we could give a simple response.
Just to add to that, we had Mr Buckley provide evidence at one of the general aviation hearings recently. It certainly is a serious matter, and I don't in any way mean to cut you short, but I think perhaps if we refer to Hansard and come back to this one.
Look, I'm happy to do that because if there's some further questions I wanted to ask on notice, I'll do that.
Yes.
The email. I'll take that course of action, Chair.
I might just add that the matter is with the Ombudsman as well.
So it hasn't been resolved, obviously.
No.
No.
That's all, Chair.
Sorry, we're just waiting. Did you get an answer back to the one we left hanging, just still waiting? Oh, you're tremendous. So, because we're going to finish it here, but if we just, would you mind hanging around? Thanks very much.
I've got a couple of questions for you, please. I just want to follow on from some questions I asked at the last, I think it was the last estimates. It's just around the harmonisation process. So, Ms Spence, I don't expect that you'll necessarily have all the facts, but we've had previously Mr Carmody had made a couple of public statements about working on that. Industry tells me it would be one of the most useful things if the organisation could get a more successful approach to being able to get the same answer from different participants in CASA. How are you going with that?
Significant work's been done in that space. I think Mr Crawford's very well placed to update the committee.
Yeah, so we're obviously on a journey doing a transformation within our organisation, and we're moving from a regional focused solution to a national focused solution, which actually lends itself to addressing that consistency issue. So we've already trialled that in a couple of areas, so you'll be aware that we're moving to the new flight crew fatigue rules, and we have a central team right now looking at people's submissions for FRMS. So we're on that journey, and the early indications are very promising.
So does that mean that regional officers of CASA are still empowered to provide advice and engage with their local aviators?
Yeah, they still are a place where local aviators can ask questions, but we've also established a central guidance centre, and that's to address the consistency issue. So it's a bit of a catch-22. So we want people to be able to reach into the sort of local office if they've got some queries. They can still do that, but we're cognisant that that's one of the reasons why we've had inconsistency in the past.
Okay. All right, well, I look forward to hearing more about that. Just back to the new fatigue rules. I understand that they are supposed to commence on the 1st of July. How is that date looking with the number of applications or submissions so far?
At the moment, we've had quite a number of submissions and we've processed them, but we're still working with the aviation community. Really, the question is, the rules provide you with a number of options, which are kind of prescriptive in an annex structure, and then there's Annex 7, which is an FRMS. So until everybody in industry's indicated what their preference is, it's hard to know exactly what's still to come our way. But at the moment, things seem to be going reasonably well.
So is it possible to have a breakdown of how many companies are expected to change over versus how many have made their submissions and how many are already approved?
So I'll take that on notice to try and get some information.
Thank you. If it's a very low amount of submissions, you think then you're going to be right to meet the 1st of July start date?
I think at the moment we still think.
I mean, you've just said there's quite a number though.
Yeah, I think that date is still achievable. But as I say, we're still working through it. We've dealt with some of the bigger organisations, obviously, who are using fatigue risk management systems that are more complex. I think what's required is a discussion with some of the smaller operators to decide whether they're going to work within an appendix which is already set out for them, or whether they're going to do a fatigue risk management solution. And that depends on the complexity. And we're engaged with people, but we're also relying on people in industry, to come to us with the proposals.
So the prescriptive flight duty period limits in the regulations are based on science, on international best practice. They meet our obligations under the International Civil Aviation Organisation, don't they? Okay. Are they broadly the same as the prescriptive requirements that are currently in effect?
There are some differences. I think it'd be fair to say that, we arranged an independent review of our fatigue rules, and that independent review ultimately took a look at what the kind of best practices were across the globe, and we tried to harmonise with the FAA, the Canadians and the EASA. So I think the rule set we've put in place isn't too onerous, let me put it that way.
So why is CASA asking operators to adjust these limits and make them more restrictive?
It depends on the set of circumstances, Senator. So there might be some examples where people are operating under a current regime that's actually outside the new regime. So we're asking them to comply with the new requirements. But as I mentioned earlier, the new requirements has essentially been constructed based on what we see being applied across the rest of the world with the more progressive regulators.
What science are you using to make these changes, to say that the previously used parameters are not suitable?
So what we actually ultimately did was we reached out and got an independent review. Our board actually asked for an independent review to be conducted, and we took the advice of that independent review. So that was at the request of industry.
Was it the request of the board?
Yeah, but the board was responding to a request from industry.
So, and Senator Stirl will be interested in this because fatigue management across a number of industries, particularly in the top end, is something that is not always very reflective of the needs of industry there. I just hope you're not focusing on people who fly just around the southeast of Queensland or Sydney and Melbourne. But before you answer that, because that was an emotive question for me, I'm sorry.
You do digress at times.
I do, don't I? It's unfortunate.
And carried away.
So, I just want to know that there is science and there's research to say that the limits that was suitable for flight duty periods, particularly in the far north, during the wet season, during mustering seasons, during high activity seasons, that you've got research that shows that what they've been working on currently was not appropriate.
Well, I think the vehicle for, if people want to work outside the prescriptive limits and the different appendices, the solution is an FRMS, because that's what an FRMS is. It's an alternate means of compliance, and it allows, if the operator can demonstrate that they can manage the perceived higher risks, let's say, associated with an extended operation, then we will evaluate it on its merit.
So essentially, Senator, two paths to get the same outcome.
So, okay. I am just trying to understand why the operator can't continue to manage their fatigue and their flying hours in the way that they've been able to do previously, using common sense, using the practical industry requirements. Because again, remembering this is a small part of the industry, but very important.
But as I said earlier, the vehicle for that operator would appear to be a fatigue risk management system, and the onus is on the operator to say, okay, with my set of operations, I would like to do a trial to prove that I can manage the mitigations, and that is the arrangement we get into with a number of operators. We've already done a number of trials, so there is a vehicle there for that operator.
So my experience to date, though, is that most operators are very reluctant to come to you with a specific requirement because it doesn't always work out well for them. It's the reason why people don't want to give evidence publicly. And I'm just telling you that. That's feedback. This is why you'll have operators that are saying, well, I'm terrified of telling CASA that I need to manage things differently because I may well be managed out of profitability or practicality.
And the challenge we have is if they don't come and share that information with us, we can't assess it. So it's a bit of a catch-22.
Do you have to assess it if they're managing it and they're
We have to
operating
if they're going to have
safely?
an FRMS, we have to assess it, yes.
Why?
Because that's what a rule set says. There's
It's
a trial.
because why?
Sorry?
It's because why?
Because that's what our regulations require.
We need
Because
to be
your
able to...
regulations require it.
because
Because you need a rule.
No, but that's the standard across the globe. If you go to other aviation regulators, they have a mechanism for assessing people who want to deviate from prescriptive limits. That's a standard practice in aviation.
It's a way of operating that doesn't reflect that I think has been it's whether or not you're addressing proportionality of regulation around different sectors within the industry.
Yeah, and I understand the proportionality, the argument, and we're in favour of the proportionality argument.
So I think, Senator, essentially we want to demonstrate you can be an outcomes-based regulator through using the FRMS, but that does require us to actually be able to do our side of it and say, yes, we think this delivers a safe outcome on the basis of the proposal that's been put to us.
Okay, so some operators have been using standard industry exemptions for many years. What did this allow for? And I assume that the exemptions approved by CASA and oversighted by CASA, meant that they were operating safely.
So there was a variety of industry exemptions in the past, and again it reverts back to we've brought in a new set of rules, and if operators want to operate differently from the prescriptive rules in the 4 or 5 annexes, there is a vehicle, and we actually created a kind of FRMS light where we said if you've just got a minor change to an appendix, we would allow that. So you could work still within the appendix but have a minor deviation. But if it's a significant deviation from an appendix, then they have to have an FRMS. That's the way the regulation's constructed.
So, but if they've had these exemptions for a long time, they've not had a problem, they've got a proven track record, is the limit allowed for under the new exemption allowed to be carried over into the new rules?
They would, if they wanted to continue with what they'd done previously, it didn't fit within an existing appendix, they would have to submit an FRMS that said this is how we want to do it. By all means, they can share their past experiences, and then what we do is a trial.
You make it seem so reasonable and so straightforward, but we know that that's not the case that people have had, particularly in the far north where they have different flying conditions and livestock handling and so forth. So you're telling me that if people come to you with examples where they want to vary their appendix, that this is going to be a process that is not going to leave them lying awake at night worrying that they're going to lose their business?
On the assumption that they're adequately managing the risks, yes.
Well, they must be, because they've been flying with these exemptions for some time.
That's a big assumption, I would suggest.
But I think the bottom line is if they capture what they're doing into an FRMS and submit it for assessment, then we would go through a trial process, and assuming that everything's okay, then that could be approved. But we do have to meet our requirements of ensuring that everybody is safe, and that includes the people in the plane.
Well, indeed, they're the most keen on being safe, and if they've been able to demonstrate that over a very long period of time, I just worry that this is another example of the tightening of the aviation noose on aviation in the north.
So, Senator, one option we could do is look at, how many FRMS applications we've had and what processes we've done through those to give you some level of comfort that we're trying to work collaboratively but maintain a strong safety record.
So are you monitoring, are these current rules going to allow you to monitor fatigue and make adjustments where needed?
Well, the reality is the operator should monitor their own fatigue management system because it's a subset of their safety management system. So when we go in and review operators and assess their safety management systems, we're interested in how they're taking safety information data and how they're addressing things as they materialise. So that's how we do it. We do it during our oversight processes.
All right. Well, I just want to flag that I hear the Air Force comment on general aviation safety and operations. The Air Force flies a fraction of the hours that these guys in the north fly. Right. So I'm really worried that as an organisation you're focused on big operations, Qantas, Virgin, Air Force pilots, and the guys who actually are out, guys and girls, aviatrix, 4% of pilots are women, that they are... that this is a sector of the industry which is so critical to developing industry in the north, tourism, moving people around on charters, that, we're going to end up with another gold-plated requirement that's going to force aviation companies in GA particularly to jump through, again, another level of red tape and cost just to continue doing what they've been doing safely for years.
All I can tell you, Senator, is we did do a lot of consultation on the new fatigue rules. We went through technical working groups, through the Aviation Safety Advisory Panel. So we had representation from a variety of the aviation sectors. Right. And, there were genuine concerns about us coming up with a set of rules that might be too restrictive or not proportionate. So our board engaged an independent entity to review it, and they came back with recommendations, and we essentially adopted those recommendations.
All right. Well, on notice, could I ask for who you consulted with?
Sure.
Where they're from, what sector of the industry, who the independent consultant was.
Yep.
And, I mean, I'm passionate about this part of the world, that I think that aviation has become more and more focused on the big end of town. But the guys who are out there mustering cattle, moving people around, doing charters, doing tourism in the far north of Australia are feeling very, very isolated and and afraid to speak up.
I'm conscious this has been going on for, I think this dates back to about 2016 when the independent review occurred. So we'll give you as much information we can about who was consulted. I'm just conscious the list could be quite long by the time we go back to when this
Well,
first
some
started.
of the people who consulted told me they stopped being engaged because they weren't being listened
Right,
to.
okay,
So
thanks, Senator.
that might be part of their challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think... Oh, great. Welcome to the CASA.
Hello.
Questioning.
Can I just ask a follow-up? Because I'm actually very new to this, but that is relevant to WA context. Would that be okay?
Please.
Mr. Crawford, in terms of the consultations you conducted in the formulation of the new process, being a national body, I'm imagining that you would have consulted with reps from WA?
So there's potential there'd be operators from WA.
Operators from WA.
Yeah.
Would you be able to provide those on notice as well, in
Sure.
addition to those? Just
So
would be
it's-
interesting to get the context on that. And then in terms of the independent, if I understand the process that you described correctly, the government contracted an independent, or the department contracted an independent organisation to undertake these consultations?
So the CASA board
The CASA board did?
decided to essentially get the services of an independent entity to conduct a review of fatigue rules, and they looked at the FAA, Transport Canada, EASA, UK, CA, CAA New Zealand, because we kind of look at them as like-minded regulators, for a better term. And they basically consolidated that information, and as you would expect, there's variations between the different regulators, and they came up, to some extent, they came up with composite values, if that helps.
And when we say independent entity, are we talking about non-government entity?
Independent to CASA, yeah.
Independent to CASA?
And to government, yeah.
Do you actually know?
I can't remember off. I
Can't
don't know.
remember off the top of your head. I'd just be curious.
Well, I'll take it in notice.
Yeah, of course. And I'd also be curious to know, again, just having kind of rolled in here, but having listened to the chair's argument, I'd be interested to know, as you created that composite from the international examples, if you're using, did you say there's a UK example in there and an FAA example?
So essentially what we did was we looked at what methodology those regulators are applying, either currently applying or were considering applying in the future, if we had that information.
If they were doing that. I would imagine that both of those contexts, though, would also, may potentially, have made allowances for variation in rural or regional contexts, or in situations where there were particularly thin markets of aviation provision. Could be wrong, but would you just be able to go back and check if there's any information you can provide around in those international examples you examined, whether there was a high degree of variation between, say, running something in a metro area in the UK versus running it in the north of Scotland, or
So what? Just to give you a bit of, hopefully a bit of comfort. Obviously, when we talk about fatigue rules down here in Australia, people say large continent, diverse regional communities, indigenous communities that rely heavily on air transport.
Hugely.
They say, some people said we're a bit unique, and but again, if you look at Canada, they've got a similar set of circumstances, and they've got mountains and winter. So we looked quite closely at the Canadians for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
And we try to do that where if we see a number of particular regulators who are maybe regulating a similar environment, we try to look at that particular solution closer, because it may, if they've already developed something, it may be worthy of.
Yeah, there's some very interesting analogies with Canada, I would imagine. But anyway, if you could provide that on notice, that'd be really useful.
And just on your question on your participants, I guess, from the different states, sometimes it's an industry association that represents.
That represents, of course.
The operator, okay.
And there'd be quite a lot of similarities between the experience of somebody operating around the north of Western Australia and the experience of somebody in ENT. So just to satisfy my curiosity. Cool, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, a fellow CASA enthusiast.
Or newly discovered.
Yeah,
cattle
newly
enthusiast.
discovered indeed.
Newly discovered rat enthusiast, in fact.
Well, isn't that fabulous? We welcome everybody. So, thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon. And there you go, Ms Spence.
Great, thank you.
You've been blooded.
We might have Senator Sheldon
Oh.
may get an answer.
Sorry, I think we've got
Sorry,
the
I
answer.
nearly got it there, Senator Stirrup.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Oh, jeez, oh, okay.
I hadn't forgotten.
So Mackay proposal is part of a grander Class C proposal that ASA is still reviewing. So this is a Class C J-curve solution that you're probably aware of. It's still in consultation. We are considering that proposal, so we've still to work our way through it. And one of the things that we are very interested in with that particular scenario, because it's very significant down the East Coast, we're very keen to make sure there's sufficient consultation. And look, I think that's probably the key thing.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr Cook. Thank you very much for that, for your help.
thanks.
Saves you the paperwork later. There you go.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you.